Hello everyone, my name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about Spunk, written by Zora Neale Hurston. Now, before I go into summary and analysis of this work, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. So Spunk is an interesting short story by Zora Neale Hurston. What basically happens is that we have this man by the name of Joe, and he has a wife by the name of Lena, and their marriage is just not going well because there's this man by the name of Spunk. He's this big, tough, huge man that, he's well known, that nobody messes with. He carries a gun, he doesn't play around, and he basically takes Lena, Joe's wife, and he doesn't, he's not afraid of anything. Spunk is just this monster of a man that everybody, in of a way fears because yes, he's huge, yes, he's not afraid of anything, and the other thing is he has a gun, and basically in the short story we see all these men. They're like at the store. And they're talking, and they know what's going on. They know what's going on in the town. They know that Spunk is seeing Lena, Joe's wife, and so Joe comes in. He's like, in the store. The men are talking about Joe's wife, and Elijah, who's this interesting character from the work, he asked Joe, "Hey, what's going on with your wife?" Because they saw Spunk walking towards the woods with Lena, Joe's wife, and they're like, this is unusual. This is, we know what's going on there. There's an affair going on. Why is Lena, who's married to Joe, spending this much time with Spunk? And they're walking arm in arm, and it's very romantic. And definitely in the short story, it's very clear that Lena has romantic feelings for Spunk. There's even a rumor that's going around. So like this town is very gossipy. The men are gossiping, the women are gossiping, and honestly, it's kind of messed up. But it kind of feels like the men in this town, they gossip more than the women. Because Elijah, who's like this narrator, he narrates or he tells us stories, or he gives us some backstory within this work, and he tells us what's going on. He tells us a few stories about Spunk and Joe and Lena. One story that he tells is that Spunk and Joe had this encounter where Joe stood up to Spunk and said, "That's my wife. Lena's my wife. You shouldn't be, going after my wife or seeing my wife." And Spunk says to Joe, "This is Elijah telling us this." This rumor, this story, and so the story pretty much goes like this. The story that Elijah tells is that Spunk and Joe, they have this confrontation. Joe and Spunk, Lena comes forward, and Joe tells Lena, "Aren't you my wife?" And Lena doesn't respond to Joe. She actually has like this disgusted look towards for Joe, and she walks away arm in arm with Spunk. And so it's a love triangle that's very, very deadly. It gets deadly. Basically, what happens next at the store when the men they've seen Spunk and Lena go off towards the woods. They see Joe come in the store, and he orders a sarsaparilla. And when Elijah teases Joe, Joe says, "Well, today I'm gonna, confront Spunk for my woman. I'm gonna, at least try to get my woman back." And he has this blade, and he's gonna go and fight Spunk. And the man thinks he's crazy because nobody would stand up to Spunk. Spunk is Spunk. He's huge, has a gun. He's not a man that no one wants to play with. But Joe, timid Joe that's not physically a match for Spunk in any way, shape, or form, he's like, "All right, I'm going to go confront Spunk." And the men think he's crazy. The men think he's going to go. Even Elijah, who actually encourages Joe to go after Lena, he's like, he's a wimp, he's not going to do it. He's just not going to do it. He's probably just going to go home and sleep or do something like that. And basically what happens is Joe does go after Spunk with the blade, and he cuts him, but he dies. Joe dies because Spunk has a gun, and he just shoots Joe with one bullet, and Joe dies. And Spunk says he killed him in self-defense with one bullet. And I mean, technically, yeah, he did kill Joe in self-defense. Joe attacked him from behind, and he had a gun, and he shot Joe, and Joe died, and Spunk was being attacked. Now, when we're thinking about morals and we're thinking about what's going on in the short story, we feel sympathy, or as the readers, we feel sympathy for Joe because, his wife is being taken. When he stands up for his wife, he gets killed. And so we feel bad for Joe, but, Spunk doesn't face, he doesn't get any legal penalties. He doesn't get arrested. Nobody touches him. They just leave him alone, and, he just walks away from the law free. And the story goes on. After all this happens, Spunk is free to get married, free to do whatever he wants. He kills Joe. He gets his wife. Well, he gets everything. Spunk gets everything. Everything he wanted, he gets. And, I mean, he's a tower of a man. He got a gun. He got a job. Lena had affections towards him. And now Joe's out of the picture, so nobody can say anything to him at this point. And then they move in, so Spunk and Lena, they move into a house together. And it kind of seemed like, Spunk wasn't going to get his happily ever after. But that doesn't happen because he sees this black bobcat that circles his house, Spunk and Lena's house, after they move into their house together. Spunk was going to go shoot the cat, but the cat is not a regular cat. The cat looks or stares at Spunk, and, it's not a normal cat, and the cat's howling, and all these weird things are happening with this cat, and he's kind of terrified of it. Later, Spunk dies, and he falls onto the saw, because he works at a mill saw. Elijah works with Spunk. They work at a mill saw, or lumber. They're working with woods or cutting down trees and things like that. Spunk ends up falling onto a saw. Now this saw is meant for cutting wood, and yes, Spunk falls into it, and he swears it's Joe, or the spirit of Joe, or Joe coming back from hell, because Spunk believes that the black bobcat is Joe, and he says that Joe pushed him onto the saw, and the saw kills Spunk, and he dies, and Lena is left alone. Both Joe and Spunk, they're dead, and pretty much into the afterlife, Spunk is like, I'm gonna go after Joe, and I'm gonna confront him in hell. So they're both Joe and Spunk, I guess the war for Lena, or the war for their hatred for each other over loving the same woman, will continue in hell, which is quite dark, because, I don't think there's anybody confronting anybody in hell. Hell is just fire. So the story ends there. There's a funeral. Joe's dad is happy or triumphant because, his son got some justice in some way, because the legal system didn't help his son, but I guess fate or bad karma helps his son get some justice. So Spunk dies. Maybe, it's the spirit of Joe in the form of a black bobcat that pushed him onto the saw, and he dies. Elijah and the rest of the town go back to whispering and gossiping. And the women are thinking, Lena's single now. I wonder who's going to be the next guy up. But it's that's really ominous, because, the track record with this woman and her dating choices does not end well. Both men died over this love triangle. So, yeah, the dating scene for Lena, or any man who go to or tries to date her or to be with her, it might not end up well for the next person in line, because when the women say, well, who's next? Who's next on this Lena chopping block? So yeah, and it goes into whispers. Lena's crying and wailing over Spunk dying. I don't think she cared much about Joe, but now she has no husband whatsoever. And the war between these two men, I guess, continues in hell. So that's how the story ends. Very interesting story. There's this love triangle, and also, I mean, you see the compare and contrast between Joe and Spunk throughout this work, this short story, in terms of a deeper meaning here. Spunk is the manly man, you know, holding a gun, tough, tall, big. You know, everybody's afraid of him, while Joe is this coward, weak, and barely able to fight head on for his woman. I mean, when some bigger guy just comes and just takes your girl and says, well, you can't do anything about it, it shows how weak and frail Joe is, and Spunk is just a massive man who can have whatever he wants. But Joe, you know, there is this sense that Joe is brave in a way, because he does confront Spunk when he knew that Spunk had a gun, when he knew Spunk was bigger than him, when he knew that Spunk could well likely kill him. So Joe, you know, puts his life on the line for love, or he stands up to Spunk, even though that, well, he didn't really have a good chance of winning the fight, but he does it anyway to show that he, or to at least try to fight for his woman, or to fight for his wife, even though it doesn't end up well. Maybe it's him as the black bobcat that comes back. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is him that finally kills Spunk in the end. Maybe it's not. I mean, you could make the connection that you know Joe had the razor, and he started the job there, and then he finished the job by pushing Spunk onto the saw. You know, razor saw. There's a connection you could do there, but there's no for sure way to submit that it's Joe that killed Spunk. It could also be his guilt that he's feeling over killing a man and also stealing his wife. So, I mean, you can be as big and tall and with a gun or doing all these things as much as you want, but no man on earth can escape his or her conscience. No man can escape his conscience. No woman can escape her conscience. So I think Spunk may have fallen into the saw, because one way we could look at it is that, well, the guilt of killing this man and taking his wife could have been too much for him to bear, and he started seeing things, and maybe not paying attention at work and working in a sawmill when all these things are going on in his mind could have caused him to fall and die on the sawmill. Or you could just submit or accept the idea that maybe it is the spirit or ghost of Joe in the form of a black bobcat that comes in and kills Spunk. So there's many ways you can look at this, but you do see, in terms of analysis, you do see the comparison between these two and how different they are, and you know, how Spunk tiring of a man. Just because you're tiring of a man, that doesn't mean that, you know, a smaller man won't stand up to you, and sometimes you get this eternal war between two opposing sides, even though that it seems that, well, Joe's the losing party, but at least he's brave enough to stand up and fight for what's his. So very interesting story. I do blame Elijah within this work, because I think Elijah encouraged Joe to do what he did and to attack. So Elijah is to blame, and Elijah plays a huge part in the short story, from narrating, from spreading the gossip, from encouraging Joe, and for, in some ways, like pushing the narrative forward. So yeah, that's all I had to say about this work. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.